Home is where our stories begin. Our Town, Our Kids works with local Kansas communities to reduce the number of their youth at risk for involvement in the juvenile justice system.
Hello, we have with us today Dr. Anthony Ferraro. Today he will be discussing co-parenting. So today I would like to discuss the role and influence that parents have on children, the ways in which co-parents experience stress, and how communities can support co-parents to help the youth. So the first question I have is, could you explain what co-parenting is?
Sure. So I typically subscribe to Feinberg's model and talking about co-parenting as it relates to how parents relate to each other in the acts of child rearing. So more simply put, how parents interact with each other in their shared goals of bringing their child up, right? Now that is co-parenting, but that doesn't necessarily always describe what a co-parent is. So a lot of times you'll hear this terminology of referring to co-parent as a person. And so who is a co-parent as well? And so in a traditional sense, a lot of times we think of co-parent as mom and dad of a shared minor child, and that's often where the literature exists. But more recently, we've become a little more reflexive to the 21st century family, and so definitions now are more inclusive to recognize and represent all of the different configurations of family types that a co-parent can exist within. So it could be, mom and dad are co-parents, but also maybe mom and grandma, or maybe dad and stepdad, right? There are a lot of different family configurations. So to capture that nuance, a lot of times we look at what the co-parenting relationships are like between those different individuals.
Thank you. The next question is about communication. So is communication important among co-parents, and if so, why?
I actually see co-parenting and communication as kind of inseparably tied, because a lot of times the ways in which those behaviors come out is through forms of communication. So oftentimes we'll talk about in terms of parent to parent and co-parents. So it could be how you're engaging with each other, how you are talking and communicating. It can also involve how communication between parents and children as well. So some of those things that we know aren't quite so good for families. So talking bad about the other parent to the child, right? Those are things that can be consumed within co-parenting. One of the things that you'll also see is that there can be different levels of communication as well, right? So when co-parenting isn't going well, it may come out as yelling at each other, as more indirect forms of conflict in which you're maybe talking down the other parent or undermining their behaviors. Sometimes on the flip side, though, it's more positive as well, and we'll see things like mutual appreciation or agreement, and a lot of times those can come out in your communication as well. So I really see co-parenting and communication as inseparably tied.
Thank you for that answer. So continuing our conversation about co-parents, can co-parenting be a stressful experience for parents?
Parenting in a lot of ways can be stressful. And as a parent of a 1.5-year-old, I can absolutely speak to that. But co-parenting in particular can also be a really stressful process. And what we see in a lot of our research with the Families in Transition Lab is that depending on the nature and quality of that co-parenting relationship, it can either be a sense of strong source of support when things are going well, or it can be a major source of chronic and persistent stress that develops over years when things aren't going so well. So it can be a very impactful source of stress, but it can also be a really supportive thing as well. And then, of course, when you kind of extrapolate that out, it can have a real impact on children too.
So the next question is, what role do parents play in the development of youth?
Well, parents can play a really central role in the development of youth. We know parents are one of the primary agents of socialization for children. They're not the only one, right? Peers are also important, teachers, the community, and within the community, that can entail a lot of things as well. What resources are available for the children? Are there good after-school programs? When you get to a little bit older, what's their childcare like? And those can make a huge difference as well. But parenting is one of those central agents of socialization. So we know that they can impact children in a lot of meaningful ways. We particularly know that parenting that is high in warmth and also high in control and monitoring can be really impactful, and for most children will result in the best outcomes in terms of their behavioral, academic achievement, their emotional regulation, and that's pretty well situated within the literature. I think when you get into nature of the co-parenting relationship and what that can do for children as well, there is theoretical and empirical support for it as a form of modeling these interpersonal processes. So children are going to see how their parents interact with each other in close romantic relationships, and even if the parents aren't together, how they're interacting with each other in terms of that relationship can be really meaningful and can set the stage for what those children's future relationships are going to look like.
Could you please share with us some of the best practices for co-parenting when young children are involved?
Sure. So co-parenting relationships, strong co-parenting relationships will oftentimes be supportive in nature, have high cooperation, high levels of agreement, so we have similar standards or rules for our children. And it's also worth noting that it can exist across different types of relationships. So you can have a strong co-parenting relationship that's not just consistently in a relationship parents. It could be those who have divorced and are just engaging in these practices that we know are really helpful for children. So that high support, high cooperation is important, but also having lower levels of conflict is generally an important part as well. Conflict can look a lot of different ways. A lot of times we think about conflict in terms of those more overt behaviors, so that yelling at each other, screaming, creating a hostile or tense environment. There is an emerging literature now that we're seeing that setting the stage for some of that are more covert behaviors that can really set a foundation for conflict that will ultimately come and manifest in these more overt forms. So things like undermining your co-parent, right? So it's okay, honey, you can go to the party, let's just not tell dad, that can be our secret, right? You're kind of going against some of those principles that you would see in an agreement or in a consistent co-parenting relationship. Things like disparaging, so talking bad about the other parent behind their back, sending messages through the child, so not dealing with some of those conflicts directly and instead making the child the messenger for those. Those are some of the things that we'll often look at as setting the stage for these more overt behaviors, and can be particularly damaging for both adult and children's well-being.
Thank you for sharing that. I like that. So for our final question, could you share about the role of communities in regards to supporting parents?
So communities can be really impactful. I think particularly when you look at what we see in terms of some of the parent education, adult education, a lot of times adult situated co-parent education, specifically a lot of states will utilize mandatory divorce education for parents, which can be really impactful in terms of intentionality in co-parenting relationships, attitudes towards co-parenting, behavioral change in co-parenting. So I think at this point, a lot of these programs need to continue to be evaluated and validated for use, but those that are targeting these co-parenting dimensions should be pretty impactful in terms of helping to alleviate some of that stress and burden and helping to build healthy co-parenting practices. What we do see is that programs that are strengths-based can be particularly impactful in terms of building up these competencies in parents. But I think we're just scratching the surface in terms of what we can do for parents and ultimately for our children.
So thank you so much for educating us about the ways in which co-parenting behavior can impact the youth.
Thanks, Mackenzie.
You're welcome.
Our Town, Our Kids is a pilot project funded through the Kansas Department of Corrections, Kansas Advisory Group, and the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. The university group is K-State Juvenile Justice Collaborative, a multidisciplinary team from Kansas State University, Fort Hays State University, and K-State Extension. Ultimately, Our Town, Our Kids aims to empower local communities with a scalable, comprehensive set of tools which will stand as an exemplar to other counties across Kansas and beyond. For more information, please go to our website at ourtownourkids.org or reach out to us directly with questions, concerns, and feedback. Thank you for your time and attention.